begin with that breaking news. Axios reports that former FBI Director James Comey has been subpoenaed, quote, in the wide-ranging grand conspiracy case against the ex-officials who investigated and prosecuted President Trump. Two sources with knowledge of the situation tell Axios. U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon, the Trump appointee who tossed out Jack Smith's classified documents case against the president, well, is now overseeing the grand jury that issued this subpoena. The grand jury is based in the Southern District of Florida, according to Axios, and it comes after an attempted prosecution of Comey failed in the Eastern District of Virginia. So far, according to Axios, this investigation, quote, has produced more than 130 subpoenas, the sources say, and targets top officials who worked under former presidents Obama and Biden. The officials, including Comey, have all decried the investigation as political persecution and lawfare. This, quote unquote, grand conspiracy posits that Democratic officials bent the rules, broke the law, and lied under oath to investigate, prosecute, and otherwise undermine Trump from his election in 2016 through his federal indictments in 2023. I want to be very clear. There's no public evidence to support that theory. And to be even clearer, this retribution effort isn't just about settling scores for Trump. No. It is also part of a larger effort to undermine trust in the 2026 midterms and beyond. Joining us now is former federal prosecutor Brendan Ballou. He's the founder of the Public Integrity Project. And MS Now political analyst Tim O'Brien is also with us. He's also senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion.
Brendan Ballou, I mean, they have tried this out in court. It has failed over and over again on court. I get that it's really hot on the internet, but the fact that they are choosing to double down on this, what does that tell you about where their thinking is?
I think it tells you that they've more or less given up on their efforts in the Eastern District of Virginia, which, as you know and as your viewers know, really struggled in their prosecutions of James Comey and Letitia James. You know, those cases basically have had about a half dozen reasons to fall apart and fell apart on just one of them. So even if that gets revived on appeal, there's all sorts of reasons why that could fail. So it seems like they've tried to move the effort to go after Trump's political opponents in a potentially more favorable jurisdiction, the Southern District of Florida. But even from the get-go, they're going to have challenges, starting with that jurisdictional question, which is, you know, if this is a grand conspiracy about an investigation into Donald Trump in the 2016 election, and let's assume for the hypothetical that all the things that they're alleging are true, well, all those crimes occurred in Washington, D.C., not in the Southern District of Florida. So right out of the bat, you're going to have a jurisdictional problem. But on top of that, you're going to have some statute of limitation problems, which, again, let's assume that everything that they're alleging or investigating was, in fact, a crime. Those would have been crimes that occurred nearly a decade ago. Most federal statutes of limitations are 5 years. So, you know, it seems like they're struggling in their old jurisdiction. It seems like they're going to struggle in this jurisdiction, too.
I guess from my perspective, a lot of this, Tim, is the typical fodder. You know, counsel here has just laid out the legal hurdles that this made-up prosecution or investigation or whatever the hell they call it. What'd you say it was, Simone? A grand conspiracy?
A grand conspiracy.
Grand conspiracy. Yeah, okay. The grand conspiracy took place when no one gave a damn about Donald Trump because no one thought he was going to win the presidency in 2016, including Donald Trump. So all this grand conspiracy to take out a guy who nobody thought was going to win, no one focused that kind of energy on this man. The most energy was focused around the Axios, the Axios Hollywood tape thing. I mean, so my point is, why are we here? And I think the politics is driving this more than the law. I think Epstein files drives this. I think a flailing about administration in Iran drives a lot of this. This sort of hook and ladder, let's sort of grab what we can to put the fire out on our terms when there is no fire, makes no sense to me. Help me make sense, as my friend Simone would say.
Well, yeah, I think the grand conspiracy here doesn't involve Jim Comey or anyone else. The grand conspiracy here involves the current White House, the current Justice Department, and the current FBI. And what they're essentially doing is they are, servants in Donald Trump's effort to go on a revenge and retribution tour. That explains most of this. you know, there's three big components there. There's obviously the, you know, the Russiagate investigation back in Trump's first term, and then the two subsequent investigations, the classified documents investigation and the 2020 election investigation. They're all different, but if you just look at what Comey appears to be being subpoenaed about solely is that first term investigation on Russiagate. Remember that the FBI's own Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, investigated the fact pattern around all of this with the support of Republicans in Congress and Donald Trump in the White House. And in 2019, he produced a report saying that the FBI's investigation wasn't motivated by political bias, that they proceeded by and large with some flaws in a very straightforward manner. The only sort of rabbit he could pull out of his hat was that the Steele dossier was used inappropriately to issue a FISA warrant against Carter Page, one long ago member of the Trump circle. That was the only meaningful way the Steele dossier played a role in any of this.
And I had nothing to do with that, by the way, just so we're clear.
I know, different Steele.
I got blamed. Oh, my God. Everyone thought I was the Steele. It wasn't me.
You're everywhere, Michael.
It was Christopher Steele.
But this has been amply investigated. There is no there. And in fact, there were very good reasons for the federal government to be concerned about Trump and the Trump campaign's intersection with Russians. Democrats' computers were hacked during the 2016 campaign. Donald Trump's son, Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort, met with a Russian lawyer in Trump Tower who claimed to have dirt on Hillary Clinton. Vladimir Putin personally signed off on internet trolls who were planting fake news on U.S. websites. All of this, it didn't amount to a criminal conspiracy, but it did amount to a very vivid intersection that deserved an examination by federal investigators, and they were just doing their job.
I just want to play Marco Rubio defending the intel community's findings in 2018, saying that he never had any doubt. Take a listen.
The intelligence community has assembled probably an unparalleled amount of evidence in regards to the Russian, not just efforts to interfere in 2016, but ongoing efforts to interfere in American society. I take you back to October of 2016. I was running for re-election, and these whole WikiLeaks issues were coming up, and I said I wouldn't talk about it because it was the work of a foreign intelligence agency at the time. I still think, well, we may have been aware of who it was. I wouldn't clear yet how that would be classified, but I've never had any doubt.
So we'll see if Marco Rubio backtracks now that he is the National Security Advisor / Secretary of State / whatever other jobs they're going to give him. This is from an analysis by Molly Roberts at Lawfare, Brendan. And so let's set that over there. This grand conspiracy thing is much like is a conspiracy theory. This is what she writes. Its proponents allege a plot against Trump that somehow manages to connect Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and James Comey to Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, and Jack Smith. The supposed scheme with which these people are all allegedly involved manages to span 3 separate presidential elections and tie together matters as obviously distinct as Russian interference in the 2016 election and the classified documents search at Mar-a-Lago. This is a conspiracy theory that was also tied to the big lie, to be very clear. So the government, because conspiracy theorists are now in charge, the government is now actively investigating a conspiracy theory when there's no there, when they won't release the rest of the Epstein files. They refuse to investigate the people that actually, had trafficked children, okay, and could tell us something about that. They don't want to touch that one, but because they found that conspiracy had a little there. But this one, they're willing to elevate with lies. And my concern is that this is not about 2016. They are laying the groundwork for what they plan to do this November and in subsequent Novembers after that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So I think there are a couple of concerns here, a couple of purposes to an investigation like this. One is to just raise the cost of opposing this administration. Even if a prosecution, even if an investigation is completely unsuccessful, you got to respond to subpoenas. You got to respond to calls to testify. That eats up a lot of time for lawyers and costs a lot of money. I think that there's also an aspect of probably internal bureaucracy in politics here, which is even if this is going to be completely unsuccessful, it feeds a base that believes in this conspiracy, and it feeds a president that believes in this conspiracy. But I think the biggest concern is exactly what you're saying, which is even if it doesn't particularly matter from a legal perspective, I don't think you get from an investigation like this to shutting down polling places in Arizona or something like that. What I think it does allow you to do is, or allows the administration to do, is tell a story saying, look, the last guys were trying to hijack an election. Implicitly, this gives us the right to hijack an election. So I think just as much as the law, this is about a narrative to set up interference in a a election.
Brenda, before we bounce it over to Tim, I do want to ask you something very specific because we now have MS Now reporting, confirming that James Comey was subpoenaed as part of this controversial Florida-based investigation. One of the details I find interesting, the subpoena sought documents, not his testimony. What kind of documents related to government investigations would Comey even have?
Ideally, none. You know, presumably most, if not all, of those documents would be classified. So one would imagine that he doesn't have any in his possession if he's following the law. You know, that's a pretty standard subpoena that you try to get documents before you call for somebody's testimony. But I also think that suggests that they don't really have the goods on James Comey. If they did, they would have called him in to testify right away.
Yes. Did you have something for Tim? I thought you had a follow-up for Tim.
I always have something for Tim, but you go ahead.
I did, yeah. I do. And it's from The Atlantic. And it involves Judge Eileen Cannon. Yeah, Eileen Cannon. Cannon's involvement could change the trajectory of the president's retribution campaign. Trump's efforts to prosecute perceived enemies have thus far rested on thin indictments brought before skeptical judges, but Trump allies insist that there's much more to come. This was from December of 2025. We are now in March of 2026, and the good old judge has reared her ugly head on top of this matter. How dangerous is this judge in promoting, phony lawsuits and elevating conspiracy claims as Simone has laid out?
Well, I think she's dangerous, Michael, because she's already demonstrated in the classified documents case that she's willing to sort of turn normal court procedures on their head and normal evidentiary practices on their head in order to serve the White House's own interests and needs. And it was very bald-faced during that investigation, and it got very heated towards the end of it between Jack Smith's prosecutors and investigators and Judge Cannon. And the only reason that investigation ran aground, along with the 2020 election interference investigation, is because Donald Trump got reelected president. And had he not been reelected president, those cases would have moved forward. They would have moved forward vigorously, and the evidence in both of them were damning. And she did, Eileen Cannon did everything she could during the Mar-a-Lago probe to just throw wrenches into what was a fairly straightforward investigation with a lot of evidence in it, including cameras from Trump's own estate at Mar-a-Lago. So I suspect what is going to happen here is she's going to play the same role, is regardless of how bald-faced some of the information or evidence may be, I think she'll do everything she can to sort of throw body blocks on behalf of the White House, which is unfortunate because it's just another cog in the judicial system being, corrupted on behalf of the White House.
And to that point, Simone, she must really think that Donald Trump's going to make her Supreme Court justice. But I can't otherwise, that judicially, it makes no sense for her to behave the way she's behaved.
Funny that you mentioned that. To be very clear, the concern that I have heard from Democrats on Capitol Hill and why they believe they need to win this next election, and not just in the House, but specifically in the Senate, is that if they do not gain the majority, that there are at least one, maybe potentially even two justices that will step down, and then Donald Trump will have the ability to nominate two justices to fill vacancies on the Supreme Court.
And they're going to be young.
The Supreme Court is definitely on the line here. And Brendan, I see you shaking your head. You're going to get the last word on this. Am I being dramatic? Is that too far-fetched?
Not that she's ever dramatic.
Yeah. I think if Republicans retain control of the Senate, Eileen Cannon has a bright future in the federal judiciary.
Mm-hmm. There it is.
There it is.
There it is.
I don't know what. Look, from where I'm sitting, I think that makes a lot of sense, Alicia. I think where these investigations go next survives because Judge Eileen Cannon will allow it to survive. And it's going to be some hard work by some good lawyers to prevent the bad stuff from happening.
Well, there we go. We're going to leave it there. Brendan Ballou, thank you. Tim O'Brien, thank you. In just a moment, folks, Congresswoman Summer Lee joins us after House Oversight Chairman James Comer attacked her, telling her to, quote, stop bitching during that private committee briefing with Pam Bondi on the Epstein files. And later, Nevada Senator Jackie Rosen is at the table after J.D. Vance said the high gas prices punishing Americans are just a temporary blip.
Oversight Committee just wrapped a deposition of Jeffrey Epstein's personal attorney, Darren Indyke, who has worked for Epstein since 1995 and is now co-executor of his estate. Documents reviewed by MS Now suggest Indyke facilitated payments to women and directed witnesses to avoid talking to law enforcement. Darren Indyke denies any wrongdoing and has not been criminally charged in connection to Epstein. Also tonight, we're learning more about what caused House Democrats to walk out during a private briefing with Pam Bondi on Epstein. Here's what happened when Democratic Congresswoman Summer Lee pressed Oversight Chairman James Comer for answers.
Instead of answering as an adult, he said that I was bitching.
I stand by what I said.
And Congresswoman Summer Lee of Pennsylvania joins us now.
Congresswoman, this is some more of what Chairman Comer had to say. Choosing to defend a comment about bitching is, in and of itself, a choice. Fact check, true. I said Democrats were bitching and wasting everyone's time because Democrats were bitching and wasting everyone's time. What was your takeaway from yesterday's exchange?
That he does not have the temperament or perhaps the competence to be able to lead this committee. It shouldn't be this hard for us to get answers. We should not have to drag people to hold pedophiles accountable. It was a simple exchange. That he blew up like that is one, because there's no accountability. And he doesn't expect any because there were no cameras and there were no witnesses outside of us. But two, he wouldn't talk that way to other people. He wouldn't talk that way. He wouldn't have blown up like that if he wasn't insecure about the questions that we were asking, if he wasn't insecure about people outside, putting pressure on them to do the right thing. And he knows that Pam Bondi is in contempt of our previous subpoena, and he's going to let her be in contempt of this one.
One follow-up on that, then I have a question about today's testimony. Have you heard from Congressman Comer today?
No.
Very interesting. Talk to us about today's testimony. This seems, Congresswoman, to be, and I know you weren't in the testimony today, but obviously it's my understanding that Democrats on the committee, you all have been in constant communication. What did you think you all were going to glean today? And then what is the next move here? Obviously, Pam Bondi is supposed to sit before the committee on April 24th. At this point, we don't know if she's coming, but what is next?
Yeah, at this point, these folks are going to do anything they possibly can to try to move this aside, try to get through this. Their hope is that this all goes away. So were we surprised that his lawyer, someone who is intimately connected to all of his enterprise, to his dealings, to his inner thoughts, to this case, that he would not know anything, that he would have no understanding or no knowledge of what's going on? Is that believable to the public? I think he knows it's not believable. We all know it's not believable to the public, but that is why we continue to put pressure on the Justice Department to give over all of the information that they have. So the next thing is we keep digging. We knew this investigation wasn't going to be easy. We know that these wealthy, these very well-connected people, we know they're not accustomed to accountability. So that's why we have subpoenas out. That's why we have subpoenas out for other people in his network, in his web. And it's why we need the last 3 million pages from the Department of Justice so that we are able to see a full picture of everything that we have information on, so that these folks are not able to lie, to cover up anymore. And the Department of Justice should not be running cover for them either. So the next step for this is to get Pam Bondi here. But also, I introduced the impeachment resolution because she's already in contempt, because she's already weaponized the DOJ, because she's already used it to cover for President Trump and for his allies. She's already used it to go after his political enemies. And we have seen enough here. We need people in here who will do the work of the people and not the work of the president.
Congresswoman, so I want to just put a little pin when you were talking about those insecurities at the beginning of your question answer. He's also showed some insecurity about being asked a tough question by a black woman who has authority to sit in the same room that he's in. Because I guarantee you, Congresswoman, I absolutely guarantee you that if one of your male colleagues had said that, those words would not have left his lips. He would not have framed his response that way. So let us all just be very clear that it's about as close as he could get to saying what he was really thinking about you in that moment without actually having saying it. So we'll just let that rest for everybody to understand for what was going on in that case. I want to go to and I know you were not in the hearing with Dyke today. But I do want to go to his opening statement because I want to get your thoughts on something that tags right into what you were just talking about. He said in his opening statement, had I known that he, Epstein, was abusing or trafficking women, I would have quit working for him at once and severed all ties with him. The truth is that I did not know what Mr. Epstein did after hours, behind closed doors, and in places where I was not present. I'd like to note for the record that Mr. Epstein was arrested for solicitation of minors and for prostitution in 2008. Mr. Dyke started working for Epstein in 1995. So I find it a little bit hard to believe that in a 13-year span, given the tightness and the closeness of those operations, that you had not a whisper. No one was gossiping on the side. All those individuals with highfalutin profiles and finely manicured nails coming onto the island, and no one knew anything. You tell me what you think, Congressman, about the cover-up.
That also is insulting. It is insulting. They are gaslighting us and the public. The deeper we get into this, the more clear it is that this was evident to very many people. We've heard people talk about the young, very young girls going in and out of his properties. We've heard tell of the men going into a private island. We have heard and we have seen reports from Palm Beach police. The DOJ files are millions of pages wide and long. The idea that his attorney knew nothing is incomprehensible, and he knows that. And they, again, what they are doing here is saying it does not matter what you, the public, think or what you want of us. It does not matter how obvious it is that we're lying. We will get away with this, and they have gotten away with it for this long. But what we have to do here is say that, no, we're not going to let up. We're not going to go for obvious falsehoods. We're not going to continue to pretend that what is clear to everybody in the world is not sitting there, right, that the emperor has no clothes on. This is a very similar issue with that, right? This idea that the American people will not believe what we see with our eyes, don't believe what we hear with our ears. He knew. He was his lawyer.
Congresswoman, to a point you made earlier about the fact that the chair felt he could speak this way to you because this was all happening behind closed doors earlier, Congressman Robert Garcia talked about the necessity of public hearings. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We've long believed it's time for a public hearing. And in fact, because there's been no public hearing, we're actually organizing our own public hearing with survivors, with other folks in Epstein's orbit, with people from Palm Beach, from other areas of the country that have information about the case. So if the majority does not schedule public hearings around this investigation, us as oversight Democrats will certainly host those ourselves. And that's going to be happening in the weeks and months ahead.
Congresswoman, in the last 30 seconds we have, can you give us a sense of what those public hearings might look like? Who might testify in them? Tonight, the White House is struggling to contain the economic fallout from Donald Trump's war of choice with Iran. Gas prices are up about 90 cents a gallon on average since the start of the war. and oil is hovering near $100 per barrel. The situation is so desperate, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the U.S. may remove some sanctions on Iranian oil in order to increase global supply. There's also a looming shortage of fertilizer, which would hurt American farmers and drive up grocery prices. But Trump is trying to convince voters the pain at the pump, well, it isn't so bad.
They said, if we do that, oil prices will go up, the economy will go down a little bit. I thought it would be worse, much worse, actually. I thought there was a chance it could be much worse. It's not bad, and it's going to be over with pretty soon. The Dow just hit 50,000 a couple of weeks ago. They said that couldn't happen for 4 years.
Speaking of the stock market, the Dow dropped 203 points today, closing at 46,000, down about 8% from that all-time high. Joining us now, Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada. She serves on the Senate Armed Services and Senate Foreign Relations Committees.
Welcome, Congresswoman. It's good to have you back at the table.
The senator.
The senator. I didn't say Congresswoman. Senator. I just want to keep this straightforward.
Yes.
How do you translate what we just heard? I mean, Dow 50,000, he's talking about stuff that happened at this point for a lot of families, ancient times, because they've had a lot of price hikes just at the gas pump in the last 2.5 to 3 weeks. How do you see their pain right now relative to the president saying should be no pain?
First of all, it's absolutely ridiculous. And I want to say this. Who pays their bills off the Dow? Nobody pays their bills off the Dow. You pay your bills off the paycheck. You know how much comes in and how much goes out. And this ridiculous war that Donald Trump, been in classified briefings, armed services, foreign relations. We can't say what they did in there, which is another issue, but they have not shown an imminent threat to enter this war. And now food is up, electricity is up, gas is up, and the gas prices are going to cause food to go up more and more. And he hasn't done a damn thing to help anybody at the kitchen table. No one pays their bills off the Dow. They pay their bills off their paycheck. And when the paycheck doesn't go as far as it did before, or when you're losing your job to AI or whatever it is, why should the American people have to say they're going to have to take a little pain? Where's the pain that Donald Trump feels? None.
Listen to former Senator, current Vice President J.D. Vance, and then an aspiring Senate member of the United States Senate candidate, Michelle Tafoya, talking about gas prices.
Look, gas prices are up, and we know they're up, and we know that people are hurting because of it, and we're doing everything that we can to ensure that they stay lower. I will say, the president said this, and I certainly agree with it. This is a temporary blip.
Maybe you take one less trip to Starbucks, and so that gas goes a little further until this thing is over and these gas prices come back down again. Let's just try to be patriots about this.
I don't know if a lot of folks in this country have taken a trip to Starbucks this week, but I know people that still have to get their children to school. I know people that still have to get to work. And so I'm just wondering if this resonates with people in Nevada.
It's kind of like let them eat cake. You'll have one less Starbucks. When people can't pay their bills, when people can't fill up their tank, they're in a billionaire bubble over there. And how do people in Nevada feel? They're losing their health care. Tourism is down because of the tariffs. Tariffs up, prices up, and nothing has been done in this administration to address affordability. Take more pain? Take more pain. How much more can people take? And so it's absolutely ridiculous that they're going on and on. No justification, no imminent threat. $1 billion a day. You know how many hungry kids that could feed? You know how many folks who are sick that could help? They cancel pediatric cancer research, RFK Jr. Maybe they could fund some of that back. And maybe they could return that $220 million that Kristi Noem spent on that, her segment of, well, she wants to be in Yellowstone, I think, $220 million on that commercial, her ad campaign. And so maybe they need to return that, because I know there are people hurting, not just in Nevada, across this country, and that money could be spent right here, right now, for good.
So, Senator, I've asked other Democratic senators what happens when all of a sudden Republicans need to decide if they want to sign their name to legislation allowing a larger budget for this war. Other Democratic senators have contended this is already Republicans' war. They have already signed off on Donald Trump and his mission here. I do think it is fundamentally different when they decide to vote in favor of a supplemental. What are you hearing for your Republican colleagues about where they are on sending more money to a war that does not have a specific end goal or a specific sense of what victory looks like?
Well, I'm afraid that they're too afraid of the president. They are so ready to bend and take a knee for whatever the president says that they will vote to send us down this slippery slope of war in the Middle East, again, with no proof of imminent threat, and they haven't come out in the light of day from those classified hearings to even let us talk about it. Haven't come to us for a supplemental, haven't talked to us. Last time I checked, Donald Trump isn't a king. He just doesn't say, I get to declare war, I'm in, I'm out, and just leave the rubble behind. We have men and women in uniform there, 13 lives. Folks injured, and there'll be injuries that you can see, and soldiers carry those injuries that you can't see for the rest of their lives. So there's a lot going on here, and the Republicans need to be mindful of the real toll that it takes on us and bring Donald Trump a little bit back to reality.
Well, that reality is something that he tries to avoid as much as possible because as the political headlines noted yesterday that Donald Trump is pressuring the Hill on voter verification, the SAVE Act, but not his own housing plan. Yeah. So going back to what you were saying
he's
about...
trying to save his butt act.
He's trying to save his butt act. I like that, Senator. I like that a lot.
I would have said something else.
So talk about what that sounds like in the cloakroom, off the floor, when you're talking to Republicans who are sitting there looking at this pressure campaign to pass something that they know at the end of the day voters don't want, and two, does not advance the ball for them back in their districts or across their states?
I think they're in a panic because the war is unpopular. This is why Donald Trump's trying to blame everybody